Hi guys, Acesup here with a hand history review from a Partypoker 109 buy-in tourney with a 15k guaranteed that was played in 2011. This video is going to be designed for those with perhaps not so much MTT experience, not complete beginners, someone who's familiar with and played a few MTTs, but would like to learn a little bit about using pokerstove and perhaps jam ranges. Um, and that means I'll be spending a little bit more time on certain hands, breaking them down. So it will be progress perhaps a little slower than the average hand history review. But I just want to make sure that everything is pretty clear for those that are a little less experienced with MTTs. So without further ado, I shall get into it. Ace King, very first hand, and it's limped. So go ahead and raise it. Fairly large raise. I do that because I think that at these early stages there's lots of poor players around that can be exploited, and lots of players won't fold once they limped, and he does call. Not a great flop. If he's limped with hands such as pairs of sixes and that sort of thing, when you see someone limp, it's usually going to be sort of a smallish pair or perhaps some Broadway cards like Jack Queen. It could sometimes be perhaps like a King X suited or something like that as well. Really, really bad hands that are suited, but some players just like to see a lot of flops. So I go ahead and c-bet, hoping to put the pressure on the small pairs. I might be able to double barrel, which means fire again on the turn and get them to fold. I could still have the best hand. If he's very loose, he might call me like ace 10 or something, I guess, if he's linked with that. Just sort of be fishing around. But the 9 of diamonds is turn card, and he checks again. So hasn't changed too much, other than obviously the flush came. But I guess he could be flushing. He might play it passively, and when I say passively, he just check calls. And now he's hoping to check raise perhaps on the turn if he has the flush. But I elect to check back here just because it seems like it's going to be hard perhaps to shake him. And he bets full pot on the river. So it's a fold now. There's really not much that we can beat unless he made the super fishy like ace 10 call, but I don't know if he would limp in pre played that way. So he could actually have had pocket twos and hit a full house. He could have had just a queen perhaps, queen 10. Maybe he even had queen 9 hit 2 pair on the turn, but was scared of the flush or wanted to try and trap us by checking. He could actually have the flush, 10 jack of diamonds or something, and have check called and then checked, hoping we bet the turn. He could even have played a 5, like a 5-6 or an ace 5 like this, I guess. And you see lots of beginning sort of fishy players. They slow play too much, and it could be the case. Not that he would have got any action really from us here without a pair. But in any case, we fold now because we just don't bet enough of the range. When we say range, we're talking about all the various hands that we put him on. We really don't beat anything. So yeah, I mean, he could even just be doing a pretty random bet with like pocket sixes because he just doesn't know what to do. He thinks he might have the best hand. He doesn't want to check, get bluffed. So all those sorts of things are going through our mind here, but we don't beat anything, so we just fold. I'll be skipping ahead to hands that I'm involved in, except for the very end where I might show a few of the other relevant hands. This hand here, I have ace jack, and it folds around to the cutoff, which is the player next to the button. If you're unfamiliar with any of the terms or things like when I'm talking about M sizes, when I'm talking about the positions at the table, if I'm talking about raising or opening, 3-betting, go right ahead and check out the videos that specifically relate to those topics, and you'll probably learn a lot about it, and it will help with your understanding of the hand history reviews in the future. I like to just call here. Sometimes I would 3-bet, so put in the raise, but we're early and we're quite deep, You know, the blinds are only 10, 20, so got around 100 BBs, 100 big blinds. So calling and controlling is not too bad either. The flop, uh, we have second best pair, top kicker, and we also have the gut shot straight if the king falls. And you also want to notice little things too, like we have the backdoor diamonds if it comes diamond diamond. So yeah, you don't want to omit any information. You want to make sure you see the full picture, and that's the sort of thing that you should be thinking. So with all that in mind, once I check, and the big blind who's also in hand checks, and he c-bets, which is a continuation bet, trying to win the pot of half. He bets half the pot size, so there's 120 in the pot. He bets 60. I go right ahead and call there. I'm thinking that we may have the best hand sometimes, and that we also have outs. And the outs would be, you know, the four kings, potentially the two remaining jacks. Um, the ace, you know, there's three aces left, but that would bring a, you know, one card straight if you had a king, so you've got to think about that sort of stuff as well. It's a pretty harmless sort of four, and when we check, he bets small again. He only bets 1/3 pot, so I go ahead and call. He only bet 80 into 240. The river's a 5, and it completes the club flush. So there's more hands that could potentially beat us now. If he had, you know, like a 6 of clubs or something like that, or you know, 6, 7 of clubs, and was betting with that sort of hand. I check and he bets 1/4 pot. So when you see a 1/4 pot bet, you know, you wouldn't normally expect it to be a bluff, because you would think that he would expect us to call because it's so cheap. If we call the 100, you can see there's 400 in the pot. He's 100, so there's 500 in the pot. So we only need to call 100 to win 500, so we're winning 5 to 1. So yeah, I go ahead and call, and he shows Jack 2. So this is pretty typical of early stage tournaments. You know, when he's betting there's not really many worse hands that will call, and we call that value betting. If he thinks he has the best hand and he's value betting, it's a bit of a mistake because, you know, the only hand that might call that's worse than what he has is, say, ace 10 or king 10, which means we have the pair of 10s and lose to his pair of jacks. But I just think with the flush, you know, that get completes, and we could have a jack, and we could be controlling the pot with a queen, and there's just so many hands that beat him that I think that that's what we call value betting too thin. And he's value betting himself, really. So he almost turned his hand into a bluff. If he had a bet full pot on the river, so that when there was 400 in the pot, if he had a bet 400, then in that case, you know, we may have folded, and he actually would have bluffed us, even though he had a middle pair. He would have, you know, turned his hand into a bluff because he would have got a better hand to fold. But yeah, the way he played it is quite random, but you can expect to see that at the start of MTTs, which is, you know, why they're so profitable, because players aren't really sure what they're doing. So I'll skip ahead now. Here, a player limps for 20, and the player to his immediate left puts in a min raise to 40, which to me, you know, it doesn't really look very strong. It seems like a bit of a fishy raise, and the player who's limped for 20 has just played Jack 2 really poorly. So sometimes you might want to try, you know, in this situation, what I do here, I go ahead and put in a reasonable size raise to take the initiative in the pot and hopefully get to be in position. And I have a video where I talk about initiative, and it's quite an underrated thing in tournaments. So check that out. The player to my immediate left, he does what we call cold call. He's not actually involved in hasn't had any action yet, and it gets to him, and he just calls the raise. So it creates quite a large pot now because the initial limper and then the raise a call as well. So the pot's quite big, and the player who made the initial little raise goes ahead and bets, and he bets full pot 706. So we have an up and down straight, which means we need the 6 or the jack. But the diamonds are there, so I'm pretty close here, and I actually think perhaps a fold is best. But I think given that the size of the pot and the fact that I felt like this guy had a strong hand because he led pot, so something like King Queen or Ace Queen, I felt like if we hit the six or the jack, we had a high likelihood of getting um, his whole stack. So even though it's 706 to call and there's 1412 in there now, so we're getting 2 to 1. I think that it's probably best to fold there because of the diamonds. You know, if we hit a six and it's a six of diamonds, somebody could have a flush. You know, there's still two players behind us, so these are the things you've got to be cautious of. Also if one of them raises, what do we do then? Because the pot's so huge now, do we commit? So I think it's probably best to fold there, but this time I called, and unfortunately we didn't hit on the turn the cards that we need, and he went ahead and bet full pot again. So most players don't usually bet full pot, so it's another sign that perhaps it's a less experienced player. Most players don't really bet full pot. So that's something worth noting as well if you see that. I go ahead and fold now, obviously. And this is just a couple of hands later. So it's the same guy from before who's min raised. So I go ahead and call here in position with the Jack Queen suited, reasonable hand. Sometimes I would raise, but he is pretty early. He's in second position, so that's one consideration. But I would like to isolate to him, and when I say isolate, I mean try to get heads up against this particular player because my feeling is that he's a weaker player. So it's good to be in position because you see the buttons over here. If we can fold out these players behind, then we could be in position against this particular player. But I elect to call this particular time. Our hand is decent, and if a player raises behind, then we get more information. If we raise and get re-raised, we probably have to fold. Whereas if we call the 40 and there's a small raise behind, we may be able to consider seeing the flop. I just in this particular spot decided just to call a 40 for those reasons. And the button player also calls, so it's three-way. It's a nice flop. Oh, sorry, the big blind's in as well, so it's four-way. Nice flop for us. We have top pair, so I go ahead and continuation bet about half the pot. There's really no reason to bet too big here, but I do want to get a little bit of value. I'm hoping hands like 5-6 and pocket sevens and things like that might call. And it actually just folds around, so that's okay. That's fine, we win that one. This is a couple of orbits later, so it's a couple of rounds later, and we have pocket sevens, and I open up, and it's heads up. The cutoff player calls. And this is one thing you want to take into consideration. That you want to think about when you're playing is don't be scared of the ace high boards and that sort of thing. Just go ahead and see bet them, because if you check, you just open the door for your opponent, to go ahead and fire with any old hand and take the pot away from you when you could have the best hand. In this case, he does call, so it seems likely that we could be beat. But the turn is an ace, so we have two pair now, which could be the best hand. You could have clubs or even smaller pairs, or just be hanging around with like a king queen or something weird, So the river's a queen, so we go ahead and check. There's no point to bet here, because nothing worse is going to call. So we just check, and then if he bets, we can just make up our mind. If we want to call or not, but I think I would probably fold. And as it was, he did have the clubs, so we had the best hand until the river. But he did have a lot of outs because he needed any club, any queen, any 10. So, the 9 clubs, 3 queens, and 3 10s. So he had 15 outs. So, he was actually favourite from the flop to win the hand. I think that's fine. You can't win every pot, so he got that one. He got that one on the river. Just gonna show this one hand here. I open for a mini raise to 120 from second, and I get 3-bet by the big blind here. So I'm a little bit too shallow here, and that's something you want to think about when you're raising small pocket pairs. You want to be thinking about your implied odds. So when I make it 120, I'm fine with someone else calling around the table because I have another 1547 behind, which is reasonable implied odds. Gives us about sort of 12 or 13, around 12 to 1. But it's pretty borderline, so you could go ahead and fold, but it's something to think about. But once we get 3-bet, now it would be 240 for me to call, and with only 1547 behind, the odds now aren't very attractive, so I go ahead and fold that one. So yeah, there's something just I want to point out there is you've got to be careful when you're opening small pairs because ideally you want to be quite deep. And you hear me talk about Lee Nelson's 5 to 10 rule, which is I'm a big fan of, which is where if it's less than 5% of your stack, it's an easy call. If it's more than 10% of your stack, it's an easy fold. And if it's in between, it's sort of borderline. Yeah, I mean it's not borderline, but you make up your mind if you want to play it or not. If it's closer to 10 and the situation's not good, closer to 10%, then you might let it go. But if it's closer to 5%, then you might play it, especially if it's multi-way or there's a bad player involved who's been overplaying and is likely to give you a whole bunch of chips if you hit a set. So yeah, be sure to check out my video on implied odds and playing small pairs and the 5 to 10 rule, because that'll help your game a lot. Because I think small pairs get lots of players into trouble when they're just starting out in MTTs. Several hands later, folds around to me on the button. I have 10 jack suited. You notice I don't raise, I just jam all in, and that's because if you calculate OM, and you should be pretty familiar with M sizes by now, but just in case, I'll just bring the calculator out, and it's simply a case of our stack 1287 divided by what's in the pot, which is 150. So I have an M of 8.5. So yeah, I mean, I at 8.5, it's profitable to be jamming 10 jack suited on the button. And be sure to check out the video on jam ranges. And I'll talk about power numbers, which is an important concept, about what hands you can jam from where based on your stack size. And in this situation, yeah, 10 jack is a profitable jam. If we're much deeper though, I might not jam it. There could be a more profitable option, raise folding or that sort of thing. So, but in this spot I jam. Plus also you got to keep in mind too that at 5100 blinds, we're already pretty short stacked, and the blinds are going to go up soon. It'll be I think next level's 75, 150, and then it's 100, 200. So you got to keep in mind too that the blinds as they go up and the antes, when the antes come in as well, there's no antes yet. Our stack's going to be even shorter if we haven't managed to find a situation to get some chips. So I'm happy to jam here, and if they do happen to have ace king or pocket sevens or something, maybe we can get lucky. But in any case, because it's profitable, I go ahead and whack it. And they both fold. Get ace king here, and same sort of thing. Where I'm 8-ish, as I said, so I just jam here ace king. I could just raise here to 240, but the jam's fine. It's obviously profitable with a hand as strong as ace king to jam, and especially if you're a beginning player, I think that it's better just to jam it, because what happens is if you make it 240 and let's say a player calls, let's say for example the button calls here, you have sort of a awkward SPR, which is SPR is a stack to pot ratio. And when I say that, what I mean is if you made it 240 and he called here, that means there's 240 and 240 is 480 plus 180 from the blinds, so it'd be 660 in the pot. Okay, and if you've made it 240, we'll only have about 1200 behind, and there's about 640 in there. So what that means is it's going to be really awkward. If the board comes Queen 9, 8, all diamonds, what are we going to do? Are we going to c-bet? And if we c-bet into jams, are we going to fold? Because the pot will be so massive by then compared to our stack size. Um, so, it's... And if we check any bets, what would we do then? So, on certain bad board textures. So it's something to think about. Is sort of already sort of planning sort of what could happen on the flop. And when you have two cards like this, the chance of you hitting a pair is around 33% on the flop. So 66% of the time we're going to be left just with ace high post flop, and we're not really going to know what to do. So it alleviates that problem. So something to think about when you get a hand like ace king. Use your stack size. And also the jam is not necessarily a strong hand because other players know that we're short. So worse hands like ace queen, even ace jack. Sometimes I even see ace 10 or worse call in this spot as well. So it's not like we're going to get not going to get action from worse hands. So I think the jam's fine. So think about all those different things when you're getting shortish, even if you do have a decent hand. This hand here, it's raised from the third to speak player and the button calls. Now, if you are just starting out, you got to be careful with these hands, and 8-9 off is not a great hand. We are pretty short though, and what I do sometimes in these situations when we're getting short is I do take a little bit of a risk. The reason is it's only another 156 here to call. So we're getting sort of 10 to 1 implied, it's 156 to call. 156 to call, and our stacks are around 1500. So, and we're getting short anyway. So we need to take a risk to get some chips. So I decide to call here and then just play, carefully post. As it is, we flop middle pair. And the original raiser c-bets. And most players are just thinking I'm the original raiser, I'm supposed to c-bet here. But it is a little bit worrying because some players won't automatically c-bet on boards of this nature. And when I say boards like this, I'm talking about the fact that, it's pretty connected with the clubs and, the jack 9. But given the pot now is 1200 and we've only got about 1200, we've got 1300, so that's a stack to pot ratio of around 1. There's really we've made the call pre to try and get a flop such as this so we can take a risk to double up. And so I go ahead and jam here, and he actually has aces, and we get really lucky on the turn and hit 2 pair. Yeah, it was a bit messy, that hand, and if you are starting out, I'd recommend just folding in those marginal spots. I think players generally tend to defend the blinds too wide, small blind and big blind, and I often see players defending the big blind from, with virtually any 2 cards. The roll of Jack 3 suited, anything suited, and any high card. Try to avoid doing that. This one here is very marginal. It's, I think most players might say it's a fold. But I was getting short and I wanted to take a risk. And I was getting a reasonable price 3-way with 8-9. So that's why I called this particular time. But yeah, do be very careful defending the big blind. Moving a couple of hands forward. Folds around, open ace 7 for a min raise on the button. And the big blind calls. It's a 4-6-6 flop. And he checks, so I go ahead and bet here. It's important in this sort of situation to think about why you're betting. Don't just go ahead and think, well, I raise pre, I have to bet. Now, the reason why I'm betting here is because I think that I have the best hand. Now, if he had a big ace, he might 3-bet pre, that is, make a raise, which he didn't, he just called. He's in the big blind, so his range is going to be pretty wide. These are all the things you've got to be thinking about. And also we want to protect, our hand if it is the best hand. He could have a hand like pocket 5s and pocket 2s and things like that. But we're going to find out now if he calls. But as it was, he just folded. So Yeah, I think the other option, and something you want to be thinking about in this sort of situation, is will you call the turn if he leads? So what I mean by that is, if we just checked back thinking, well, I'm scared he might check raise and I probably have the best hand, so I'm going to check back and control. You can take that line, and I take that line sometimes. What will you do then if the turn is, say, Queen of Diamonds, and he bets? Will you call? Because by betting the flop, you really simplify that situation. You avoid getting yourself in hard spots on the turn. So for that reason, I think it's definitely good to bet on more dynamic boards. And when I say dynamic, I mean there's more draws. So draw heavy boards, such as if the board was say 10-9, 3 with two clubs, where you could have the Jack Queen, a club draw, some sort of combination draw, um, 7-8, King Jack maybe for a gut shot with overcards, all those sorts of hands. I might go ahead and bet on those types of boards, because if he leads turn, say the turn was a Jack, or even a low card, or a club, and he leads the turn, then it would be really hard for us. But on a board such as this, it's more sort of static. When we use the term static, I mean that the best hand now is most of the time still going to be the best hand um, on the turn, and also it doesn't seem like a 4-6-6 board would hit the sort of hands that he'd defend the big blind with. Which could be like a lot of hands, but a lot of the times it'll be like 9-10, 10 Jack, Queen 10, King 10, those sorts of hands. So if you did get, it should still be the best hand on the turn most of the time. So sometimes I will check back for that reason, and then if it's a low card again on the turn, I'll call his turn bet. And then, just depending on what comes on the river, you make up your mind if you want to make the hero call with ace high or not. So they're all the things that sort of you want to be starting to run through your mind, is not just what to do on the flop, but how that impacts what's going to happen on the turn and ultimately the river, and what line is going to make it perhaps the easiest for you to play and potentially the most profitable. I'll move along now. This is several hands later, and the UTG player, which is under the gun, the first player to act, he min raises. It gets around to us in the big blind. I call. Now, a lot of you sort of when you're starting up might think, oh, Jacks is a great hand. It's a powerhouse. I go ahead and raise. But you gotta remember here that we're still pretty deep. The blinds are only 61-20, so we have around 30 big blinds. Sorry about that. That's my printer. Around 30 big blinds, and he's raised UTG is normally quite a strong hand, because he's got all these players behind that can 3-bet him. And so you definitely want to take that into consideration. If I raise here to say 600 and he jams, it's a pretty ugly spot, because most of the time a UTG raiser, then who gets re-raised and then follows it up, with a bigger raise is going to have something really strong, which Jacks might not necessarily be in very good shape against. I mean, you'd really be hoping to see Ace King, hoping it's a flip, but he could easily have the bigger pairs. And if you're really lucky, he might, I guess, have tens, but that's about it that you're ahead of. So for those reasons, you got to be careful how you proceed with UTG players. So I keep the pot small and call and check, and he c-bets. It's a reasonable board for our hand. We still have second best pair. So I do call. And the turn's not a very good card. It's the ace. And I check and he checks back. So that's a good sign that we could have the best hand. And the river's another ace, which is a good hand for us. Because I think if he had an ace on the turn, he would most likely bet it. Especially if he's raised UTG. Because if he did have an ace, it would probably be a big ace. So the only thing really that we'd be worried about here, I guess, is if he has King Queen. We have two Jacks, so it's a little bit less likely he has Jack Queen. And he's raised UTG, so I don't think he has a worse Queen than Queen King. So it looks like he's got a pair smaller than ours. But having said that, if we bet, you have to think about what would call. Um, if he has pocket sevens and we bet, would he call? It's pretty unlikely because we could have the ace, the queen, the nine, the bigger pairs. So I just don't see him calling with that sort of hand, unless we bet really tiny. Like maybe 200. Maybe that's a consideration. Um, but the other thing is too that he could have a hand, perhaps, that he wants to turn into a bluff and bet, in which case we can call. And if we did bet really small and he made a big raise, it puts us in a hard position. So all these things sort of going through your mind, sort of dictating what action you want to proceed with. And so I think checking here is a fine play. And he checks back, and he did actually have the pair that it looked like he had. So it's not particularly hard to put him on that sort of hand when he's raised UTG, and then checks back turn and checks river. It looks like he has tens, eights, sevens, that sort of thing. So this is just a couple of hands later, and a player in the where he's in the hijack +1. So if you should be familiar with the positions by now. Button, cutoff, hijack. We can call this hijack +1 or middle position. He 3x's, so you got to be a little bit wary about 3x's from 120 to 360. I'm on the button with ace jack suited, so I go ahead and call. We see a flop. Nice flop for us because of the two hearts. And he does a sort of that's kind of on the larger side, 677 into 900. And I know this particular player's name, I recognise it. He plays a lot of MTTs. So you want to keep that in mind too. Maybe I had a few notes on him and I'd check the notes, that sort of thing. And you want to be taking notes. So yeah, keep that in mind as well because that can make a difference of how you might play a hand. With our overcards and the flush, our hand's very strong, so I go ahead and put in a raise. You could jam here, but the raise is also fine. They both, obviously, if he jams now, we have to call with good reason too, because we have such a strong draw. Occasionally, I guess we could have the best hand. He could have like, Queen King of Hearts, something like that. So, but in any case, we're going to be in reasonable shape. But he just folds. So yeah, I mean, you could write a note there. C bet pretty hard, almost. I think it was over 2/3 pot, and folded to a raise on the flop. Things like that. Yeah, they'll those sort of know. Any information you can get is good. This hand we have pocket twos in the big blind, and the small blind has almost put in half his stack and he's quite short. So it's important just to consider not so much the raise size in this situation. Just sort of, he's virtually all in. So just really, I think, just consider it like an all in. He's got about 1,000, which is a pretty short sort of M6ish or so. So just go ahead and put him all in. And you don't want to get distracted by the fact that he only raised rather than jamming and say, oh, why did he just raise, not jam? Maybe he actually wants action. Maybe he's got a strong hand. Don't overcomplicate things like that too much. People are just trying to give off the wrong message, as he was here with the 5-6 offsuit. He made up in his mind he was committing to the pot, and thought, well, rather than go all in, I will just put a raise out there. I think he was hoping it might look a bit stronger. So make sure you don't get too confused by things like that. And we managed to hold up, touch 2 overs with pocket twos. We win a nice pot there. It's about a round later, and we're on the button with pocket sevens. Now you notice, coming back to the M size, there's around 500 in there. You can always round it off, especially when you're playing a lot of tables. It makes life much easier. So he's got around 3,000. So 3,000 divided by 500. So he's got an M of around 6. So you want to bear that in mind. Players usually have a stronger than normal hand when they just raise it sort of around M6. because not lots of players will raise fold. It gets to the point where you're risking, you know, too much of your stack. And if you get jammed, you're getting really good odds because it's not that much for you more for you to call. You imagine if he had say M4, imagine he only had 2,000 and he raised. Um, he'd have about 1/4 of his stack in, and then if he gets jammed, he'd be getting really good odds to call. So that's the general sort of the nature of the tourneys, why players don't raise really low stacks and then fold. And if you're doing it, you want to avoid, especially I think raise folding below M5 is a big no-no. There could be spots where you might raise fold perhaps M6, such as if the player's behind us super duper tight. But as a general rule, just to make your life easier, try not to be raise folding below M7. So if you're doing that, I think it's probably going to be a mistake, and it'll help your game if you cut it out, because lots of beginning players will raise fold really short stacks, and it's an error. So with an M6 stack, I go ahead and commit him to the pot, and rather than raise here, I just decide to jam. We're around M12, so it's a pretty big jam because we do have a couple of players behind. But I decided to just simplify the hand and go ahead and jam it. It's profitable anyway to be jamming M12 with 2 stacks behind. Not that we would be if it had a folded to us. We would have just opened for 400 on the button, and then if we got 3-bet, we probably would have gone ahead and 4-bet it, and that would be a 4-bet jam. So just open jamming, I mean, wouldn't be optimal, even though it's profitable. There's more optimal lines you can take, even if mathematically a play is correct. You might have a more optimal mathematical play. But in any case here, it's been opened, like we said, by the M6 stack. So M6 stack, we just go ahead and 3-bet, and I just 3-bet jam it. And he calls, so it's kind of like what we thought. He did just raise M6. So you got to keep your eyes on that, because if it's a bad player, they raise fold all day long at M6. But if it's a good player, if this player here, King B, if he had have been the raiser, I probably would actually have folded, because it would look super strong, even though 7s is quite a good hand. But this player here, who I probably aren't familiar with, now it becomes a raise commit situation, just because players will raise fold short and or call off with really bad hands like ace deuce and stuff. So he flops a full, so we were drawing to running 7s. So we lose that one. It's a bit annoying. This hand here, the player again, so there's 500 in the pot. He's got about 2,000, so you should be able to quickly calculate by now that he's M4 and he jams. So when a M4 jams from the hijack and you're in the cutoff with ace 10, and the fact that we're M6 with 3,000 makes it pretty easy re-isolation. So go ahead and re-jam it. And we expect to have the best hand there a lot of the time because he's short and getting desperate, so he's just jamming. And we do, and we manage to hold. So we end up with the flush with ace, so that's a good pot. Get a few chips back. It's good to bounce straight back after a loss there with the 7s, so it's good. Here we have 10s. I go ahead and raise it in the hijack, and the BB defends. Really nice flop for us. So when he checks, I go ahead and value bet, but he just folds, so couldn't get action there. Folds to us with ace 3, and yeah, we're about M10. It's not too bad a stack size to be raising. So anytime you open, you want to be conscious of the stack size behind. And you can see here that there's sort of an M10 and 12 and a shorter stack, sort of M5. So it'd be tough if he jammed. But because it's half our stack, yeah, I might fold to his jam because we only have ace 3 offsuit, pretty weak hand. But you don't want to stop that from you opening, because you need to stay active to keep accumulating chips, because your objective is to win the tourney. So it is marginal, and you want to be careful when you're starting out opening with marginal hands, especially until you feel a bit more comfortable playing post flop. If I was M8 and 9, opening is perhaps a little bit better here because at M8 and 9, it's very hard for players to 3-bet you. And if you want to find out more about that, then check out the 3-betting videos and more videos about stack size. But basically at sort of an M and 9, it's pretty hard for players to 3-bet you because you don't have a lot of chips. So it's a combination of the fact that they feel like that you might have a hand, and if you actually do have a hand, or if you do decide to 4-bet, which is then to re-raise their raise and go all in, they'll be getting pretty good odds to call because your stack's not that deep. So yeah, you want to start to think about when you're raising the stacks behind and how you proceed, based on their actions and what they might be thinking about your sort of range when you open. Hopefully you're already thinking about that. If you are, that's great. And yeah, they just fold here, so we pick up the blinds, which it's good to keep picking up the blinds. I'll try it again here with a 2-3 suited on the button. Worked last time, and it worked again, which is good. The other thing too is you notice on the button there's only the 2 players to get through, so if they're on the tight side, there's always a good chance that you'll pick the blinds up, no problem. Here, Jack Queen open again. This time the big blind defends, and we get a really nice flop. We flop trips. So when he checks, we go ahead and bet half pot. It's no point. Definitely, you don't want to be slow playing, checking back. You just want to go ahead and value because, he expects you to be continuation betting. Because when it's heads up, players would be, we'd be continuation betting, king ten and all sorts of things here. So you just want to just play as normal. Don't slow play. Try to get maximum value. I see lots of beginners try and slow play and be overly tricky. He actually calls the flop, and now he bets on the turn. Kind of a fishy line. So it looks like he may be pretending he has a queen, but he could have a marginal hand like an 8 or maybe a draw. In any case, I decided to go and just jam all in, but he just snap folds. So he may even have called like 10 jack a gut shot and then lead turn, try and pretend he had a queen. So it's a bit of a fishy line. Yeah. This is next hand. And I open with ace 9 and get 3-bet by player 2 to our left. And he's around sort of M10ish. So that's that sort of size where, that's that sort of spot where, if he was much shorter, he probably would just jam or fold. But he's got the stack size where he could potentially 3-bet and fold if we jam. But in any case, I let him have that one. Because, he's got some short stacks behind. So, when he 3-bets, if they jam, he obviously has to call off. So sometimes when you see a player raise, put the 3-bet out like that. If there's short stacks behind, sometimes it increases the likelihood of they actually have a hand because they're probably looking behind and saying, oh, if he jams, I have to call. If he jams, maybe I can fold. If he jams, I have to call. If he jams, I can probably fold. Do you know if they are 3-betting light with a hand like King Jack or something, Ace 8? We call that 3-betting light because it's it's not a great hand. But it can still be good to 3-bet those hands. So in this particular time, I let him have that one. Ace King here from second. Open for a raise, everyone folds. 9-10 here, and second position opens. About M11. It's marginal. 400 to call though, so we're getting about 20 to 1. 400 to call, we've got 8,000 behind. That's what you should be thinking, You're not thinking, okay, it's 400 and there's 1420 in the pot. We're getting, just over 3 to 1 to call 400 with 1420 in the pot. Don't be thinking like that because, what about post-flop? It's a post-flop game, so call, see a flop, and, get a factor in the implied odds that you can win. And we actually flop middle pair on the ace high board. I check, he goes ahead and bets really hard. It's a really tough spot. And we could call here and see what he does on the turn. but because he's bet quite hard and he's open from second position, so you know when you get to the flop, you're still remembering what happened pre-flop. Put all the information that's available together. I actually go ahead and yeah, I fold there. I mean, pretty close, and you might think that if you called pre-way, you're folding on the flop. But I just felt like in that particular situation that he had it, and it's important not to compound any error. We made a pretty borderline call um, with a 9-10 suited. I think the call's okay, but you know it is getting close to borderline. So then we don't want to compound the error post flop by you know calling off one or two streets. So I go ahead and fold it. A couple of hands later, ladies on the button, and cut off raises, so that's great. I just go ahead and jam. And yeah, so we're about sort of he's effective stack size. So we're M7, sorry M10. There's 700 in there. So we're about M10, but you always want to make sure you're looking at the effective stack size, and the effective stack size is M7, which is his stack, because he's the player that's made the action here. And so if I raise here, he's quite short and he's opened. If I raise, I think it looks really strong because obviously we're committing to him, and it almost looks like we want action. We have a big hand. So you know, if you had a big hand, most players with queens, aces, kings would probably raise here to like 1500, trying to get action. But you know, if you make it 1500 here and you can see he's so short, players will go, well, why is he making 1500 when he's so short? He knows he's going to be all in if he wants to play the hand. So he must have a really good hand that he doesn't mind getting all in. Looks really strong. So by jamming, you could have, the players might misinterpret it and think that you have a marginal hand that you're just like, I don't really know what to do. Yeah, I'm just going to commit to this guy. I'm just going to jam, M10. So you see pocket sixes, ace 10 suited, things like that. So, you got to be sort of thinking about the sort of how people will interpret your bets and things like that. So it depends on what level they're at. If they're a real basic player, and some of you out there who are watching this might be going, oh, why did you go all in? That looks so strong. You've bet your whole stack, all your chips. Yeah, that sort of logic I think is how a lot of beginning players would sort of view that hand. But as you get more attuned to players thinking and stack sizes, you will soon learn that sometimes bigger bets actually can be interpreted as weaker hands. Whereas smaller bets can sometimes be interpreted as stronger hands, so it works both ways. So part of the reason why you're watching these videos is to see this stuff and learn about it. King 3 here, and something that you want to, when you're playing, as you get more experience playing, you want to keep opening, staying active. And when I say active, selectively picking spots to open up and also 3-bet players. And here the King 3 is a reasonable open. We're about M11. Don't think the players have been getting too out of line behind us, so we can expect to pick up the blinds a reasonable amount of time. And if you have a look, you can see that the ante is add up to 400, the big blind's 400, and the small blind's 200, so that means there's 1000 in the pot. So if you work that out mathematically, we're risking 831, divide that by the amount we can win, which is 1831. Don't forget to include your initial raise in the total pot, because you win that back if you win the pot. So that's how you work it out, and you can see it's 45%. So it only needs to work 45% of the time. If you think it's going to work more than that, then go ahead and open. Don't forget too, you can still win post flop. If say the BB defends and he checks the flop and we see bet, then we win his call. The amount that he called as well. But do keep in mind that you could get yourself in trouble. If you get called by, say, the button player calls, you're out of position with a bad hand. So you got to pick your spots carefully. But you do want to stay active. And everyone's heard about aggressive poker. And that's a combination of 3-betting and 4-betting and especially opening, where you can pick up dead money. Is really profitable. So I think guys, it's been long enough for part 1. So I'll end off on that note, and yeah, hopefully you've been able to keep up I've been going pretty slow with the hands and the breakdowns. Haven't been trying to overcomplicate things, and that will continue in part two. So I hope you join me again then. Thanks for watching. This has been Acesup.